we will be beginning Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by the legend Daniel Hopsicker. Bit of a thick one, so we'll be here a while. Dedication to Debbie Seal for her courage and grace, and to the victims of the longest war ever fought for profit, the drug war. Preface. They wanted the world we got, and we got the world they wanted. We all know where we were. If you're over 40, you remember where you were and what you were doing when you heard the news. There are moments in life when time freezes. When the clock stops. For my generation, this was the moment. 30 years later, a generation shocked, horrified, and finally numbered first by JFK's murder, and then Martin and Bobby's become hardened, somewhat between Dallas and Vietnam, Watergate and Iran-Contra, whatever the Clinton thing was. Conspiracies might be easier to believe in that our own government, but so what? We all still had to make a living. But the question keeps coming back, the one I've lived with and spent 2 years trying to answer. Could the assassination and scandals of the 60s and 70s be somehow related to the cocaine epidemic that swept America during the 1980s? Could the most successful drug smuggler in American history, Barry Seal, have also been involved in the seminal covert operations compromising America's secret history? The Kennedy hit, Watergate, and CIA drug smuggling? In other words, could the goings in on Mena, Arkansas, of Barry and the Boys, about which conspiracy theorists have spun such elaborate gossamer webs, could this have been just the continuation of business as usual? For me, a 30-year-long odyssey is ending, a roller coaster ride through the savage heartland of America to find truth about Alder Berryman, Barry Seal, a journey which ended at 2 separate locations in the French Quarter of Old New Orleans. The Quarter is America's Casablanca, a scruffy place featuring nightly covered intrigue. Musicians and bourbon streets still hammer out 3-chord blues on old guitars while old dogs lay idly alongside a top hat salted with dollar bills. New Orleans is today in the middle stages of Disneyfication, but it can still be seen out of the corner of your eyes. A place of narrow alleyways crowded by overhanging wrought iron balconies with iconic pilasters and plaster cornices vying for attention with strangely plump women with fiery red hair and cat-eyed sunglasses stuffed into too tight turquoise dresses. Here in the heart of the French Quarter, one finds not the Beanie Babies and Pokemon of Middle America, but the Gris spells, Bad Mojo, ancient 18th century skulls, wishing stumps, and black velvet paintings illustrating the lineage of past voodoo priestesses. New Orleans, sometimes called the least annoying French place on earth, is where the saints got 6 and 10. Our quest ended a block off Bourbon Street on Royal Street, since the 1830s home to pricey galleries and antique shops. It was here one recent rainy day, while sipping a cafe au lait and nibbling a bignette, that we sat waiting for a tall, erect man in his early 70s to return from lunch to his antique store across the street, located next to the Rothschild's Gallery. The owner of Dixon and Dixon's Art and Antique Store, Dave Dixon, has long been one of Louisiana's most prominent citizens, known as an intimate of governors for decades, locally revered as the father of the Louisiana Superdome, described in the local press most often as a French Quarter art dealer. Dixon discovered Dixon, we discovered, was the longtime CIA handler of most successful drug smuggler in American history, Barry Seal. You will hear about Mr. Dixon and the world which he and his cohorts have wrought in the pages of this book. His life and Seal's truly comprise significant chunks of America's secret history. But first, so that you might better evaluate what you are about to hear, here is a little about the teller of this tale. 2 years ago, while heading a production company which produced a business magazine television show airing internationally on NBC, there's only one of us, had just set out to do a pilot for a new half-hour show. Remember, In Search of, with Leonard Nimoy, a successful format, we thought, and back in those more innocent Trekkie times, there had been no running around in camouflage uniforms blubbering on and on about the New World Order, so we figured we would update In Search of for the paranoid 90s. Alas, the story we chose to feature on our pilot, called America's Most Famous Unsolved Mystery, turned out to be the ultimate sticky wicket known as The Train Deaths, or The Boys on the Tracks, the title of Mara Levriet's excellent recent books, St. Martin's Press, on the case. It involves the murders of two high school seniors in the wrong place at the wrong time who ended up being brutally murdered after stumbling onto a, quote, drug drop in Arkansas in 1987 in a bedroom suburb of Little Rock, an area where neighbors had complained to the local sheriff about low-flying aircraft buzzing over their homes late at night with their lights off. We arrived in Arkansas at as a more or less typical example of Los Angeles West Side liberal mentality. If we gave any thought at all to the hysteria surrounding Bill Clinton at the time, 1997, which we didn't, we probably would have told you we assumed it was the result of a successful right-wing Republican propaganda campaign. We learned in Arkansas that we had been both right and wrong. It might be propaganda, but too much of it also seemed to be all too real. The systemic corruption and intimidation, the fear, and most importantly, the legendary officially sanctioned drug smuggling through the small town of Mena. California may be the place for freeway helicopter pursuits, but we know nothing of drugs raining in duffel bags from the skies on a semi-regular basis like they do in Arkansas, and California has nothing remotely equivalent to the colorful behavior and criminal exotica which help relieve the tedium of daily life along the humid Gulf Coast. In the Southeast, from Texas through Louisiana and Arkansas to Florida, life's two biggest rituals may seem to be high school football, Friday night and Sunday mornings in church. But strangely, it's also here that the nationwide distribution of narcotics has been a major growth industry for as long as some people can remember. Like Louisiana, where the weather permanently hovers between sultry and sweltering, and the lawyers outside federal courthouses specialized in desultory speculation about whether this or that particular fix could remain in a place long enough for this or that politician slash miscreant to contact the right people and make the right deal at just the right place. Or in Arkansas, where drug drops in some neighborhoods were endured by citizens like they were long lines at Department of Motor like they were long lines at Department of Motor Vehicles. We heard from seemingly solid citizens whose faces were scrutinized closely and in vain for hints of right-wing Republican fanaticism, that drug drops happened regularly in that otherwise heartbreakingly unexceptional state. Unexceptional state. The citizens of Saline County, where the train deaths took place, seemed anything but a conspiracy mongering bunch. They lived and worked in a bedroom community 30 minutes outside the state capital of Little Rock, with the anonymity of middle class people everywhere. They go to church, they pay taxes, they mow their lawns, they sew. The results of our initial investigation became not a half-hour TV pilot, but a 2-hour TV documentary about the train deaths and their connection to the rampant drug smuggling carried on through Mena, Arkansas. Helmed by the legendary Barry Seal, virtually everyone we met in Arkansas had heard about Seal's multi-billion-dollar cocaine cargo airline operation. And although Barry Seal had been very publicly assassinated a year before the train deaths occurred, his name is so inextricably linked to the subject of drug smuggling in Arkansas that he had immediately became the focus of our attempts to understand what might have taken place where Bill Clinton was governor. During the production, we went on an unforgettable midnight ride through the Mena airport with Russell Welch, formerly a criminal investigator for the Arkansas State Police. He is a man who was exposed, according to his doctors, to military-grade anthrax because Welch says he wouldn't turn a blind eye on the smuggling taking place there. He wouldn't let us film him or even tape record his voice that night. Even if we had been carrying a recorder, it would have been rendered useless when he pulled the old trick of cranking the car radio in his Oldsmobile loud while talking and wheeling around the perimeter of the interregional mountain airport at Mena. But we caught clearly the gist of what he had to say. What has come to be known as the Mena scandal is not just about things that went on during the 1980s. Apparently, it is also about things that are going on right now. See the hangar? Welch would ask, pointing out this or that building looming in the darkness. That's owned by ... And he'd launch into an anecdote. That's owned by George Reeb, who today owns almost half the airport. He said one stop on our tour, when the Arkansas State Police looked into his suspicious activities, we found that he doesn't exist in the history's past a safe house in Baltimore in 1972. At another hangar, he said, that hangar's owned by a guy who smuggled heroin through Laos back in the 70s. Again, that hangar's owned by a guy who just went bankrupt. So what's he do? Flies to Europe for more money? Don't tell me crime doesn't pay. Welch pointed out a half-dozen lumbering Fokker F-O-K-K-E-R aircraft parked in a row on the apron. The DEA's been tracking those planes back and forth to Colombia for a while now. You get the picture. So did we. When we had finished our documentary, we proudly showed it to our big dog Hollywood/producer film friend who handles stellar talents like Billy Crystal and Robin Williams. And since only your friends in Hollywood ever give you the bad news straight, we believed him when he told us, sadly, your show will not air while Clinton is president. We believed him, but we didn't stop trying until months later, when a man closing negotiations for the airing the special had his car deliberately smashed while driving through suburban Los Angeles. A black Chevrolet Suburban with natch, heavily tinted glass cut him off on Wilshire Boulevard near Los Angeles Federal Building, stopped in front of him and, obvious to the heavy noon traffic, shifted into reverse and rammed into his small Honda, causing extensive damage and minor injury before escaping off the 405 freeway. That weekend, the warning was punctuated. His home was ransacked and vandalized, but the only items taken were marketing materials for our show. Left untouched were valuable collections of rare coins and guns. That did get our attention. Our now incensed friend was busily pricing weaponry and home surveillance equipment, fearing injury or worse. We told our friend to cease all efforts on our behalf. After the dust had settled, we decided to write this book. In November of 1973, while Nixon was still in the White House, an article called From Dallas to Watergate, the longest cover-up, came out muckraking Ramparts magazine, written by UC Berkeley professor Peter Dale Scott. I believe that a full exposure of the Watergate conspiracy will help us to understand what happened in Dallas and also to understand the covert forces which later mired America in a covert war in Southeast Asia, he wrote. What links the scandal of Watergate to the assassinations in Dallas is the increasingly ominous symbiosis between U.S. intelligence networks and the forces of organized crime. It is, Scott wrote, no coincidence that most of Watergate's shadow players dwelt in the same conspiratorial world that led to the Bay of Pigs, the assassination plots against Castro involving CIA mob teamwork, and the gun and drug running syndicates formed in pre-revolutionary Cuba and later transplanted to Miami. That had led to, in other words, the JFK assassination. Barry Siebel was an active participant in all these events which compromise America's recent secret history. Seal flew guns to Castro in the mountains of Cuba when the CIA was backing him, and then he flew weapons to Castro's CIA opponents after the agency had turned on its creation. Seal flew at the Bay of Pigs, flew his weapons, and got busted in Watergate. Most controversially, he is even alleged to have flown a getaway plane out of Dallas, Texas after the Kennedy assassination, and all this before he became infamous for importing tons of cocaine, at least $5 billion worth by government estimates, through Mena, Arkansas. In the scandal that's been called the scandal behind the scandal in Iran-Contra and Whitewater. We discovered that it had not been by accident that Barry Seal had found the riches of El Dorado in the covert drug smuggling operation in Mena. He had big boosters and received big help on both the state and federal level. The epic squalor of the events illumined by Seal's life can be almost painful to describe. The second terminus of our journey was at the doorstep of 4507 Magazine Street in New Orleans. There, from behind the screen door of a dark apartment around the back of a dilapidated old rooming house, a man named Clay spoke above the noise from a TV turned to an SBN workout show from a sandy beach a million miles away, and confirmed that his was indeed the apartment where Lee Harvey Oswald had lived while in New Orleans in 1963. Most people don't know about Lee Harvey Oswald in Louisiana at all. And was it Lee Harvey Oswald with Judith Ferry Baker doing gain-of-function research? Not Lee Harvey Oswald being a scientist, but Judith Ferry Baker was. We went to Magazine Street to check out our story, first reported about author Ed Haslam whilst researching Frontline's 1992 documentary on Lee Harvey Oswald, that the rooming house Oswald lived in while in New Orleans had been controlled by Mike McLeany, a Havana casino owner and Meyer Lansky lieutenant, while he was at the same time also running for the CIA's training camp for assassins, from which one of the shooter teams in the JFK hit is reputed to have come, a camp which Lee Oswald had visited. If Haslam was right, while CIA-sponsored exiles were encamped in the swampy country across Lake Pontchartrain. From New Orleans, Lee Harvey Oswald was living in a CIA safe house. Most importantly, Lee Harvey Oswald and Barry Seal had been cadets together in Louisiana Civil Air Patrol. We will learn, and he had even gone to a 2-week-long CAP summer camp together where both first met their eventual recruiter into what a E. Howard Hunt pluckishly calls clandestine services, David Ferry. It is the central thesis of this book that following Barry Seal's lifelong government career in clandestine services leads in a straight line from the killing of a president. Seal's CIA handler Dave Dixon was a good friend of the only man ever charged with conspiracy to murder President Kennedy, Clay Shaw, to the ruin of the inner cities of this country by the cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, an epidemic fueled in no small part by the billions of dollars worth of cocaine which Barry Seal's operation imported. Commenting on the CIA's affair with the mafia, LBJ's press secretary Bill Moyers said, "Once we decide that anything goes, anything can come home to haunt us. If a fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise," wrote poet William Blake. "I persisted, and I may have proved him right." New Orleans, July 27th, 2000. Let's see how long these are. Yes, I will pick this up tomorrow. That was the preface. We will start chapter 1 tomorrow.